Penn State fans, it's Bob Flounders joined by Daniel Gallen. We're going to do yet another blue-white breakdown podcast, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. If any of you listen to Tuesdays with myself and Dave Jones, I just want to personally say, hey, look, Dave might have got a little sidetracked yesterday and forgot the mission statement, which was to kind of talk about Penn State football. We did the final 2/3 of the show with some NFLers who did well in the playoffs, but I don't know that all of you really wanted to hear about the Ohio State Minnesota men's basketball game from 1972. But you know what, Daniel? That is water under the bridge. My pledge is we are going to just talk about Penn State football out of season. I got a couple of topics I want to get to with you, but I know you're such a busy guy, Daniel. How are you holding up covering Penn State football, Penn State recruiting, Penn State men's basketball? And I saw you've been dabbling in Penn State women's volleyball because I believe they just hired a new leader to take over for the legendary Russ Rose. Excuse me. I hope I have that right. But you are one busy dude, man.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. I mean, it's the off season for football, but the rest of the Penn State athletics world keeps turning. It was very educational this morning while I was having breakfast to learn about that Ohio State Minnesota basketball game.
What'd you have for breakfast?
Just peanut butter and banana.
I'm
light
I'm a peanut butter guy too.
I'll circle back for a larger lunch. Need to have a salad. It's been one of those weeks. But no, like you said, yesterday, Penn State women's volleyball introduced just the third coach in that program's 46-year history. Katie Schumacher-Cawley, she played here, won the 1999 national championship. She's been on the bench for the past 4 years as an assistant coach. She has previous head coaching experience at Illinois, Chicago, and Penn. And she said that she's not scared of the task of replacing Russ Rose.
I mean, the phrase people always use is "big shoes to fill," and it's never been more. Trying to follow in the footsteps of Joe Paterno, trying to follow in the footsteps of Russ Rose. At some point, somebody is going to try and follow in the footsteps of Cael Sanderson. I just wanted to say I made sure I watched that demolition. Penn State just destroyed Michigan in wrestling out in Ann Arbor on Friday. That was almost never a match. It was just fascinating to watch that team and just how he gets guys ready. They're always just, laser focused in top condition. They don't make any mistakes. Close matches more often than not, they find a way to win. They also upset a lot of really good kids. Just but to your point, it's tough to step into those shoes, and somebody down the road is going to have to do that with Cael Sanderson. Good luck to that person. But Daniel, let's talk about Penn State football. One of the things I'm starting to focus in on is, this 2022 recruiting class that James Franklin and his assistants have put together. It's starting to feel like with all the things that are happening after the signing, with, guys getting noticed, with Nick Singleton being honored as the National Offensive Player of the Year, with many people speaking up and saying Drew Allar might be the best quarterback in the class. And now this week, I always get this, I have my fingers crossed. Dennis-Sutton. Did I have that right?
Dani.
Sorry. Dennis-Sutton. Now I think On 3 or 247 Sports. Is it 247 Sports? One of them has elevated him to now a 5-star prospect. And I'm just looking at this class, and they had a 2018 class with 3 perceived 5-stars that didn't work out. It was just Micah, who might as well have been an 8-star. But Justin Shorter, nope. Ricky Slade, nope. But this class, with just the depth of it and some of the top end talent, even a kid like Kaden Saunders, who's enrolled to be ready for spring practice, he looks like he's on the 5-star bubble. So I'm just wondering, with all these accolades coming in after the official signing, this class has a chance to be super duper special if everyone is right about these kids. And I think it's just really interesting. It's coming at a critical time, I think, for Penn State, coming off a 7-6 season with so many needs, losing 6 of 8. And a lot of these kids are enrolled early. And the trend, Daniel, is you look at the teams in the playoffs, they're standouts. A lot of their standouts are first or second year players. So you just wonder, if everyone's right about this class, man, talk about hitting the ground running maybe in 2022. It could be Penn State, but I just think this is, if you're a Penn State fan, to hear all these kids just kind of, it's almost like Penn State was right on them, but not only were they right on them, everyone's just catching up to how right Penn State was on them.
Yeah, Dennis-Sutton on Monday got his 5th star from On3, and then today he got his 5th star from 247 right before we started recording. Right. Rivals has had him as a 5-star for a very long time. I need to look at, I think that he kind of fits in that kind of top 30 range. I think that these outlets or these services try to do 32 5-stars. That's kind of the logic, aka 32 first-round picks, guys who could be first-round picks in the NFL.
Did not know that.
And so Dennis-Sutton, I think that he was number 27 from 24/7 Sports, in that similar range by On3. And then Rivals, he was number 25. He was number 11 when he committed over the summer, but he had kind of an interesting end to his high school career. Didn't have a junior year at the McDonough school because of the pandemic, got hurt early in his senior year, and then I think came on really strong for the postseason all-star circuit. But yeah, I think that you look at overall with this class that between Drew Allar, Nick Singleton, and Dennis-Sutton, you have 3 top flight players. And then you look at Allar and Dennis-Sutton specifically, you have top flight prospects at 2 of the most positions on the field. Obviously, we've talked about the quarterback ad nauseum, just how important that is. But if you can have a game changer at defensive end, a game changing pass rusher, we've seen what these Alabama and Georgia defenses can do with who they have coming off the edge. It's really big. And Dennis-Sutton, I think James Franklin mentioned him on signing day as one of the guys who didn't enroll early, but could be a contributor. And you know that he's coming from the McDonough school outside of Baltimore in Maryland. PJ Mustipher, Devon Ellies, Curtis Jacobs all went there. They play a tough schedule. They play I think they played LaSalle College out of Philadelphia this year. So you deny Dennis-Sutton and Abdul Carter, another signee going at it. So he's going to be battle tested. And I think that that's kind of interesting for him to be able to come in and maybe work into that defensive end rotation. We've talked about kind of the need there for people to step up. But yeah, it's interesting. And I think kind of your larger point about the being able to identify these players and kind of be there for them. I think that with Dennis-Sutton, I mean, he picked Penn State over Alabama and Georgia. People had been on him for a really long time, but I think you look more at Allar and Singleton. I mean, it's a great job of identifying those guys, getting them in the fold, and then keeping them there. And now I'm no expert when it comes to these things, but when you compare it to the 2018 class, one thing that stands out to me is kind of, Drew Allar. I don't know if calling him a late bloomer is necessarily the best. It seems like the physical tools were always there. It was just kind of getting noticed. But when you think about those guys in 2018, Parsons, Shorter, and Slade, all of those guys were day 1 5-stars. I was working at the Washington Post in 2014 when Ricky Slade was a freshman, and we were having this meeting, and we were like, wait, this freshman out in Hilton just scored 7 touchdowns in a game. Like, Penn State's interested, Ohio State's interested. Shorter was kind of similar, where he had that reputation very early. And then obviously with Parsons, you knew what you were getting from when he was a sophomore. And so I think that it kind of goes both ways, where in terms of development, that maybe you want to focus in on these guys that are maybe hitting their physical peak, physical maturity when they're 18, 19, instead of when they're 16, 17.
Yeah. And to your point, I still, with Ricky Slade, I still scratch my head over there obviously there could have been a multitude of things that impacted his development and why, things turned out the way that they did for him. But the highlight tape, just the, what he did before he got to Penn State, and, backing up Miles Sanders as a true freshman in 2018, he did some really, really good things when they leaned on the running game. And Justin Shorter was a New Jersey 5-star, and Penn State's history with big wideouts from New Jersey is very hit or miss. They've had some good ones, but they've also had some guys that just, he's at the top of the list, but, Saeed Blacknall or Charles, they've just had Jawan Johnson, he had the catch in the Iowa game, but after that, like, what are we really talking about? Then he does some great things at Oregon. That to me is a little bit easier to explain, but man, Ricky Slade, I just really, really would love to know one day. To me, that is where are they now when he's 28 years old? I would love to I know, and hopefully he's a success somewhere. I would love to just hear his thoughts on what transpired between, 2018 and, the present day, because I think there were a lot of people that thought he was going to be a super, super player. And Daniel, it just didn't work out. Before I get to one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, for some news here on the Blue White Breakdown podcast. This isn't really news, but I think Penn State fans, I'm starting to wonder, is there any level of concern in your mind? Penn State just has not been very busy with regard to the transfer portal. Now they've lost some players that I don't know how many of them qualify as huge. Oh boy, Will Levis going to Kentucky or whatever. I don't know how many of them are huge losses, but there just hasn't been a lot of an influx of talent yet. We got everyone's spoiled by Arnold Ebiketie now, because they're like, well, we should expect one or two of those players to come in every year because we've done it once. We have great, I'm talking about Penn State fans. We've done it once. Our coaching staff's got great contacts, yada, yada, yada. What is the deal? But who knows? I'm sure Penn State has a plan. I'm sure they still have some targets, and maybe some kids are just going to wait a little while longer to make some decisions. But with that in mind, I was just wondering, is there any update on that Ivy League offensive lineman, Daniel? Have you heard anything about him maybe becoming closer to a decision? Because I think Penn State was on his list.
Yeah, that's Hunter Norzad, the all Ivy League right tackle from Cornell. It seems like that he's just kind of going through the process. I think the schedule that was reported had him on campus last weekend. So I think that we'll probably hear something on that front soon. Obviously with these commitments, it can come at any time when you're least expecting it. But yeah, there were a couple questions in my mailbag this week about the transfer portal. And I think that James Franklin has made it very clear that his kind of philosophy about it is that he's going to be very deliberate. They're going to make the right decision, that the fit obviously goes beyond what's on the field. He's also made some comments in terms of, how quickly some of these kids come to their decisions on where they're going to go, and where that falls into some of the rules and regulations around the transfer portal. But I don't know. I mean, I think that it's the type of thing that I wouldn't worry about it too much, because you look at kind of the ratio of guys that you bring in, how many of them are actually going to be hits. What is Penn State actually looking for? Obviously, you want to build through your recruiting class, and you want to use the portal to kind of plug some holes here and there. I mean, you don't want to build through the portal because, you don't necessarily get the same amount of time with these players. The continuity isn't quite there. I mean, I am surprised that given the success that Penn State had last year, where you had a star in Ebiketie, you had 2 season-long starters in Derek Tangelo and Eric Wilson. You got Johnny Dixon, who I think we're going to see a lot more of this year. And then you had a miss in John Lovett. And then AJ Litton, I think he was fine. You got 1 year. He was a great special teams player.
Yeah.
he's moving on.
Yeah.
So I think that you look at that and you have to take a lot of swings to get someone like Ebiketie. And I think that sometimes the way the roster works out is you don't necessarily have the space to take that many swings. So I don't know. I mean, it's also a thing where this is brand new. So we're going to see over the next couple of years how this works out for people, whether bringing in 12 transfers is something that actually works. I think, maybe Penn State could be a little bit more aggressive, but I don't, like, someone asked me, characterized it as James Franklin being asleep at the wheel. And I think that's the last way I would describe him in any regard of his program. I think that they are committing to a philosophy, and we're going to see kind of how that shakes out. The other last word that I'll give on it is that at the end of spring practice, there's going to be a whole nother round of transfer portal entrants. And then there will be a whole nother crop of guys. So, like, okay, they got Mitchell Tinsley, who I think could be a pretty big addition.
Sure.
They got him, the only one between the end of the season and now. But when we get to March, April, May, there could be a whole of, maybe then there's 5 guys that come in. So we'll see. Yeah. It's just kind of one of those things where, like, part of me is just like, just relax.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about with James, he's talked about, you balance need with fit. And he's talked about that, especially in the transfer portal. I think that last year, Ebiketie was it was a need. They were replacing 2 hugely talented defensive ends. And he was an older player who they had known a little bit about. And I think there were some relationships there. And he turned out to just be a great fit. And I think the Ivy League offensive lineman, so if you talk about need and fit, with Penn State looking for, legitimately looking for 3 starters on the offensive line, I don't think, once you get past Hugh Scruggs and Kaden Wallace, I don't think anything's promised to any of the other guys, even though you and I probably have a pretty good idea who they liked coming out of the year. But if you want to talk about need and fit, an Ivy League offensive lineman who's experienced coming to this program, if he's going to make the jump, that to me seems like a no-brainer too. I don't know how good he is, but he sounds like he has been very, very good at that level, and they definitely need some players to fill that out. So hopefully he'll make his decision sooner rather than later. And I do think if they get him, he'll definitely be a player immediately to watch, given their needs, Daniel, on the offensive line. Okay, so let's switch it to, I've been doing this series on young players to watch this offseason. And spoiler alert, there's going to be a lot more. So I think it's 2022. So I think I've had like 22 names in mind, and I'm only about a third of the way through. But I just wanted to throw a couple of names at you, because what interests me and what interests you is not necessarily the same. So a couple of the players that I've mentioned already, why don't you pick 1 or 2 of them and maybe speak on maybe what they might intrigue you a little bit more than other guys on the list. So I had Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle, Jaylen Reed, the safety. For what's today, Wednesday? For Thursday's paper, I'm going to write about another offensive lineman, Landon Tengwall. The other quarterback that's in the class, Bo Prabula, Malik Mega. I think everyone's got him on some kind of list to watch, so I don't know how surprising that is. But Kobe King, the twin brother of Kalen, and then Zariah Fisher, a defensive end that I think that, after Smith Vilbert had his big game in the Outback Bowl, and Adisa Isaac's coming back, Nick Tarburton started to do some things in the final month of the season. I don't know how excited people are maybe about Zariah Fisher. So those are some of the names that I've talked about and written about on that list. Daniel, is there 1 or 2 guys that kind of fascinate you as maybe a guy you're really going to be looking at, not only in spring but in August?
Yeah, I think that Kobe King definitely stands out to me, given the turnover that's happening at that linebacker position. And when you think about it, that position this year, they got full seasons out of Brandon Smith, Curtis Jacobs, Else Brooks. Else Brooks obviously missed a half against Ball State because of his targeting penalty, but then you had Jesse Lucetta who could slide back there. But the fact that, that's a position where those guys take a beating. We saw Ellis Brooks play half the season with a cast on, so he wasn't at 100%. And I think that Penn State was pretty fortunate that they made it through without any major injuries there, because the depth right behind them, I mean, Charlie Catshier, Tyler Elsdon, and then the two freshmen, Budden and King. I mean, that's a bit of a drop off when you look at things. So I think that Kobe King is really interesting because you have to replace Brandon Smith and Ellis Brooks. Obviously, Curtis Jacobs is in line. I've been beating that drum for a while. He's in for
Okay, he deserves it. He deserves it.
Big responsibility. And I think that Kobe King kind of also factors in, like, how he's used in his development also factors into kind of any philosophical switches in the defense under Manny Diaz. We know that Brent Pry loved to play three linebackers, and that third linebacker was often essentially a nickel corner, or like a third safety in certain alignments. So is Manny Diaz going to play more just true nickel? Is he going to stick with those three linebackers? I know that he's a base 4-3 guy, but the number of wide receivers and kind of the spread systems, you don't necessarily see a Brent Pry defense that much in modern football at any level, really. So I think Kobe King is really interesting from that perspective.
Yeah. And depending on what Penn State decides to do with Jonathan Sutherland,
Mhm.
he pretty much was pretty much just a linebacker, I think, in the Outback Bowl. He's maybe not the most nimble of safeties. He's a really valuable team leader, special teams player. Do they decide to keep him at safety? Do they just have him a hybrid like they did with Lucetta? But they're going to have to play him. They're going to have to decide where they want to play him as the majority of snaps. Now, the solution could be he's just going to be one of those guys that he's a safety linebacker, and we'll start him, but we don't really have to designate whether he's a linebacker or safety because he could do a little bit of both. But I just wonder if the idea is to get your most athletic defense on the field, if there aren't some other players, when you talk about, the corner room with Kalen King, Joey Porter Jr., Daquan Hardy, those are three pretty athletic corners. You look at safety, obviously, with Jair Brown, but another guy, Jaylen Reed, to me, is a guy that I think if he takes a step forward, he's going to be very tough to keep off the field, because I know they like Keaton Ellis as well. So I just don't know, Daniel, about Jonathan Sutherland and maybe what his role is. He's such a good teammate. I think he would accept pretty much any role thrown his way. But I think this defense, Manny has some very interesting parts. If he can get some defensive linemen going that we're not really expecting. I mean, if Smith Vilbert can take the next step. But I do think when you talk about the linebackers, when you talk about the idea of starting three linebackers against a Big Ten offense, once you get past Curtis Jacobs, who are the best fits for, 60 snap duty or 50 snap duty? And it could very well be looking at somebody like Kobe King. He might just be ready to make the jump. Nothing against Charlie Catshier, but he's an older player. He's been around a little bit. And I just don't know about Elsdon. I think he's in his third year now. Are those guys ready for every down roles at linebacker?
Yeah, I think that when you look at like Jonathan Sutherland, he's kind of like the perfect like Sam linebacker. If Brent Pry was coming back, that he would make perfect sense to go there. And then maybe, I don't know, Kobe King or Jamari Budden in the middle at the mic, right. Curtis Jacobs at the will. But we don't know yet what the Manny Diaz kind of classifications are going to be there. So I think that's kind of that will be an interesting storyline for spring and into the summer that I think that we'll have to kind of just wait and see. But I think the defense when it comes to young guys is just really interesting because there's so many guys in that redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior, kind of third, fourth, a couple second year guys that you need to see take the step forward. I also think Zariah Fisher is an interesting one based on how he's bounced around positions already. And so is he going to have the chance to step forward, to take that big step forward, compete with Adisa Isaac, Smith Vilbert for playing time? What does that kind of exactly look like? I think that'll be kind of an interesting thing to keep an eye on as we go forward.
our former colleague Greg Pickle and I, we did a most interesting player, it was most interesting players and coaches, I think, either going into spring or coming out of spring. And we had last year, I think we had Adisa Isaac, because we didn't know about Ebiketie. We had him high up, but we had Adisa Isaac really high on our list because they lost Owe, they lost, Shaka Tony. We heard so much about Isaac, and we're at that media day news conference, and James is like, I don't know if it was media day or right after that. He's like, yeah, he's probably not going to play this year. He's got an injury. He's right there at the top of my list again this year, because if they don't get a big year from him or a meaningful year from him, boy, they are, and the transfer portal doesn't produce anything at the end position. They are going to be really, really, really thin at a position that is huge value at the defensive side. So I'm not trying to put pressure on Adisa Isaac. I just know what they thought of him in that 2019 recruiting class with Brandon Smith and some of those other guys. He was right up there with those guys, and I really hope he's healthy, because we haven't seen him play to the level people thought he could play at yet. And it's not necessarily his fault, but boy, he is a huge player to watch this offseason, assuming he's ready to go. Because Daniel, you can't lose a player like Ebiketie and really a player like Jesse Luketa, and then the year before lose Owe and then Tony, and expect there to be a lot of developed players at the position in the system. So it's not fair to Dennis-Sutton. Did I do it right? Did I get it right?
Deny.
All right. I'm just gonna. So phonetically, it's just gonna be Daneye. That's how I'm gonna spell it for him, because I'm like 0 for 8. But I mean, my point is to have him in August. Hey, we're gonna need a big. I mean, Etor Gross Matos couldn't do it in 2017. Jason Owe couldn't do it. Right out of the gate either. It's really hard to get a true freshman playing at such a high level. So yeah, Adisa Isaac, I feel like we're going to be doing a blue-white breakdown podcast just on him once we get closer to spring. But it is fascinating to watch this defense try and come together under a new defensive coordinator, because you just don't know what his ideas are compared to Brent Pry's. Because Brent Pry, he was really good at moving players around, Daniel, and he was really good. But you kind of knew what you're going to get from Brent Pry, I think. But I think there was not a lot of tricks up the sleeves from Brent. So I don't know what Manny's about. I'm excited to see that, but I think I'm more excited to watch the defense than the offense just because of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the defense kind of has more of the unknowns, which I think that is kind of interesting, given that the offense needs to replace 3 starters on the offensive line. Yeah. But I do think that the defense, there's more kind of faces that we know there. Like, we've seen all these guys on the field and get meaningful playing time, like Zariah Fisher, like Smith Vilbert, and in certain cases produce. But they're expected to take a big step forward. And I think that Dennis-Sutton coming in and being able to produce as a freshman is interesting. That's kind of at another position group. It's like there's been a lot of questions about the offensive line. Like, can any of these freshmen come in and contribute? And the answer is usually, well, probably not. So you need to look at and it's kind of similar on the defensive side of the ball in the trenches. You want to look at the redshirt freshmen, the redshirt sophomores. Those are the guys that have had their chance to adjust their bodies, to develop a little bit. And I think that's where you need to look for to see guys make the leap. So that's someone like Zariah Fisher. That's someone like Smith Vilbert, and the true freshmen who didn't play last year, Devon Townley and Rodney McGraw. It'll be interesting to see where they are in their development, because I think they were both kind of on the kind of project trajectory in terms of what they needed to do when they got here.
Those are some quality defensive end comments, especially Daniel's comments on Dennis-Sutton. So I had to close getting it right. Now that I figured out phonetically how I'm going to remember his name, I'm never going to mess it up again. I love what I did there. Daniel, thanks for your time today on the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Is your next event going to be basketball? Is there a recruiting thing next on your agenda? I'm guessing after the volleyball hire that's probably a little bit on your back burner. So now you can just focus on 9 other things.
Yeah, we got it's Wednesday, so yeah, we got Wednesday. So men's basketball is at Indiana tonight. I'll be tuned into that. And on Monday, Iowa comes to the Bryce Jordan Center. And those 2 teams played in a pretty interesting game last Saturday. So it's basketball season. Penn State's 3-5. The Big Ten is there's that big middle class. So they could make a move if they can string together a couple wins.
Sounds good. That's it for this edition of the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Penn State fans, just remember, a little bit later in the week, Daniel and Dustin Hawkins will be sitting down to talk more about. He hasn't told me what he's going to talk about yet. We had a talk before we did this podcast. He's kind of got some ideas, but I'm not sure where he's going with the podcast. I think it usually runs either Thursday night or Friday morning, depending on where you get your Blue White Breakdown podcast. But I know we're all looking forward to it. Daniel, stay warm up there, stay busy, and I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Bob.